I've heard about you. I want you to know what an honor it is for me to stand in your presence. Before I begin, I want you to know that if I was talking to you one-on-one, first thing I'd do is find out what books have you read? What trainings have you taken? What words and concepts do you use as you explore this idea of being God-informed? And then after finding that out, we could do this whole thing based on the words you're familiar with, the concepts you're used to. But since I'm up here and my people were all Montana, there's a good chance as I get on a roll this morning, I might say something that's a little different than you're used to. I might quote scripture a little different or tell a story that's a little different. And all I would ask is if we run into a place where there's a little difference, please look past it. Because I guarantee you my sole intention this morning is to remind each of us how absolutely magnificent and powerful we are right now. Now with that said, when I come to a church for the first time, I tell a little of my story, how I got into this marvelous philosophy we call unity, what I call the practical application of the teachings of Jesus. When I was 22, I hurt my back. I was working construction in the summer between college. After a year of chiropractors, osteopaths, and physical therapy, the pain just got debilitating, so finally I agreed to have a spinal fusion. Went in, doctor said you'll have this fusion, a little bone around where this ruptured disc is. Anyway, I went in, had surgery, had a spinal fusion. Turned out during surgery my spine got infected with the E. coli bacteria. E. coli is a bad bug, and this was 40-some years ago. So my doctor said, look, with E. coli there's only one way to get it out. We need to go cut it out. So he did 4 surgeries over that next year to get rid of the infection, and every time he went it was worse. It had spread. Finally, after the last one, he said, look, this is way out of my league. You need more than one primary care physician. You need a whole team of doctors. So I've referred you to the University of Washington Medical Center, a big teaching hospital in Seattle. That's where I lived. And they've accepted your case. So I went in there, and within a couple days, I became a real celebrity. Turned out I had the worst case of osteomyelitis of the spine, infection of the bone they'd ever seen. So my doctor became this visiting professor from England, orthopedics. He was supposed to be the number 3 orthopedic surgeon in the whole world. The other professors didn't talk like that, but the interns and residents did. And this guy was kind of standoffish, and he said, look, with E. coli, there's no good antibiotics, so I need to find out where this is, and I'm going to just go cut it out. But I don't want to be blindsided when I go in, so I want to do tests to find out how extensive this is. Okay, it's all right with me. So they did tests for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, all day, every day. They poked me in places I didn't even know I had places. Finally, he came in one afternoon, and he was different when he walked in that afternoon. He didn't seem kind of as arrogant, as stand-up. He seemed to have a little more compassion. Anyway, but I didn't understand that stuff. I was 23, So he said, look, we got good x-rays. It's a lot more involved than I thought it was, so I'm going to have a meeting tomorrow with some other specialists. After the meeting, we'll come in and tell you what we're going to do. Now we'll do the surgery the next morning. I said, okay. That afternoon, my wife came to visit me. The first thing she said when she walked into my room was, what's going on? And I said, what do you mean? She said, all the nurses are different. None of them would look me in the eye. What has happened? And I said, I don't know. Next day, we waited for these guys to have their meeting. 5 o'clock came and went, nobody showed up, which really surprised me because my doctors are all professors. Usually professors go home at 5 o'clock. 6 o'clock came and went, 7 o'clock came and went. 8:15, the door to my private room opened up and in walked 6 surgeons. 6. If it's good news, there's usually one person to tell you. And if it's bad news, they tell you by committee. There was this visiting orthopedic surgeon from England, the head of the general surgery department, the head of the Department of Infectious Disease, and 3 top residents, and this is what they said. This infection has spread. It's throughout your spine, from about midway all the way down to your tailbone. It's throughout your pelvic area, it's throughout your abdomen. We're pretty sure the E. coli is eating holes in your colon, so the germs are communicating back and forth. It's followed both your sciatic nerves into your thighs, and if we don't stop it now, you will die. You know, doctors tend not to say that kind of stuff. What they say is, we have to stop it now because it's become life-threatening, which means if we don't stop it now, you will die. So he said, tomorrow what we're going to do is we're going to take down the operating theater, and the general surgeons are going to start from the front. They're going to start as low as they can go down here in your pelvic area. We'll come up around your belly button and go almost up to your sternum. We're going to open all that up. We're going to cut out all the infected tissue, separate your organs out of the way, and when we get out of the spine, the orthopedic surgeons will chisel and scrape the infection out of your spine. He went into a lot more detail than I'm giving you. When we're done with that, we're going to roll you over, and the orthopedic surgeons are going to start. They're going to start as low as they go, but down here between your buttocks. We're going to come up mid-back, open all that up, cut all of the infected tissue, chisel and scrape the infection out of your spine. When we're done with that, two teams of surgeons are going to start at your belt line and open both your buttocks and follow your sciatic nerves into your thighs. And when we're done with that, we're going to tip you up on the end and come in from the bottom. That would have got my attention. He got about 5 minutes into that thing, and I just started shaking. My wife came and held me on one side. The head nurse came and held me on the other side. I just shook. My body knew what they were going to do. They were going to gut me like a dead deer. When he got all done, he sat down on the chair, pulled it up next to my bed, and reached out and took my hand. And that's when I knew I was in trouble, because this guy was not a touchy-feely doctor. And he said, I know how radical this must seem, Terry, but we have to do this. When we're done with the surgery, the drains, the antibiotics that we do have in the drains, we're pretty sure we can stop the infection from spreading anymore. The bad news is we can guarantee you are going to lose the use of your left leg through nerve damage. And then he just looked at me. And I just looked at him. And he just looked at me. And finally I figured it must be my turn to say something, and I heard come out of my own mouth, that's okay. That's okay. If we've got to do this, let's get it over with. But even as I heard those words come out of my own mouth, I thought, what has happened to me? What has happened that in just 1 year I would so willingly give up the use of my left leg? But I no sooner said that than he reached up and clamped my hand between his, and he said, son, we have to do this. The bad news is if it's as extensive as we think it is, there's a good chance you will lose some of the mobility of your right leg. You're probably going to lose the control of your bowels and your bladder. And there's a very good chance you're going to end up sexually impotent. I was 23. When all those guys left, the resident who'd been with me for the 2 weeks of tests sat on my bed, and he held me. And this was 40 years ago. We'd become friends. We were almost the same age. He had a daughter, I had a daughter. We'd become friends, and he just sat on my bed and held me. And when I finally calmed down, he said, Terry, we don't know what's going to happen. We've never seen anything like this. That's why we're in a meeting for almost 4 hours. But what we do know is you cannot expect to come out of this ordeal whole. The name of my book is The Hell I Can't. I invite you this morning to get underneath the words I use. Get underneath the concepts. If I say something different, get past it. Because when I talk to you about your authority on this physical plane, when I talk about the idea that all things are possible if only you believe they are, it's not some book I read somewhere. It's what I got to use. They went in the next morning and pulled my bowels out and just clipped them and sewed them. They said the lower end of your colon is just total, there's no holes in it, it's like a sieve. They said you're going to go to the bathroom in a plastic bag the rest of your life. It's called the colostomy. A month later, they did that big surgery. I was on the table for 13 and a half hours, took 27 units of blood, and the reason they stopped is they were losing me. When I came out of the coma 4 days later, they went in to finish it. I had that infection for 11 years. I had 27 major surgical procedures on my spine and abdomen with a general anesthetic. I'm not counting the ones they did with a local. I got letters from some of the finest doctors in the world to the insurance company, because after a while the insurance company, I hurt my back on the job, So labor and industry insurance was paying for everything, and after a couple of surgeries, they started writing letters saying, when are you going to fix this guy? And the doctors wrote letters back, and I have those letters. I have letters from some of the finest doctors in the world that say what I had was not curable, and that I'd be left with significant, permanent disability. I'm going to be 69 next month, in November. I don't have a bad back. I'm not recovering from a bad back. I don't have a colostomy anymore. I have none of the physical limitations they would say I have, and I don't have any pain. Why? Because I healed my body. Sometimes people come to me and they say, don't you mean God healed your body? I look them right in the eye and say, no, I don't. My God didn't make me sick, and my God didn't make me well. My God simply communicated to me, I adore you just the way that you are, and you pick the game, and I will play with you there. What we're going to speak about this morning is, what game have you picked? Because remember, it was Jesus that said, as ye believe, so shall it be done unto you. But today isn't about how to use these principles to heal the sick, and certainly we can do that. This morning isn't about how to use these principles to create abundance or loving, nurturing relationships, and sure, you can do that. What I want to talk about this morning is the mystical heritage of unity. Where does this stuff come from? Because of my focus, because of the health challenge I had, as I would read throughout the years, my focus was always on, how do you grow corn with this stuff? What did Jesus mean when he said, all things are possible if only you believe they are? What did he mean when he said the faith of a mustard seed will move a mountain? Did he mean that I could develop enough faith to heal myself? What did Buddha mean when Buddha said, you're a sum total of the thoughts that you'll think about all day long? What were these great teachers thinking about? So as I've studied, I began to see this silver thread of truth that runs through all the great teachings. So I want to talk about the mystical heritage of unity. The oldest living religion, and now this is a brief summary of the mystical heritage. I mean, there have been 10,000 books written on mysticism. The oldest living religion is the Hindu faith. When I first started studying the Hindu faith, it was real confusing. It looks like they got a god for everything. But one of the things I began to understand right away is one of the foundations for the Hindu teachings is everybody is different. And so they move into their teachings to support the differences. If you're a farmer and your priority is to grow crops, they got a god, a statue of a god, who's there just to help you grow crops. So it allows somebody to begin to relate to the divine presence based on their personal priorities, growing crops. If you're a woman and you want to have children, they got a god, a symbol of a god, goddess, that will assist you to become pregnant and raise healthy, vital children. And so it allows wherever one's priorities are, they can begin to relate to God. And then as you move up, you begin to understand there are all these various symbols, and all these various unique gods are really just various facets of the one God. As you move into the Hindu teachings, you can move up into what's called the mystical teachings of Hinduism. But you couldn't go study the mystical teachings within the Hindu faith unless you were born of the right caste system, unless you had come from the right family. You couldn't study the mystical teachings unless you were a male. Of course you couldn't. They wouldn't allow women to understand these principles. And so there was only a very select group who got to study the mystical teachings within Hinduism. And how the mystical teachings might be summarized, there was a wonderful book called The Magic and Mysticism of India. And in that, the author says this: in the Hindu teachings, it had held that the universe was created by a process known as creative mind. And that each of us is in possession of part of this creative mind. That's the idea that we talk about in unity, the mind of God is my mind. That in the Hindu faith, they say that the whole universe was formed by creative mind, and that each of us has a portion of this creative mind. And then they go on to say that the Hindu teachings hold that when your creative mind is disciplined enough, you have the power to create material representations in form without the need for physical labor. That's kind of a big sentence that means, pick up your bed and walk. Be ye cleansed. If you're having a party and you run out of wine, just do some little woo-woo stuff and you can change water into wine. That kind of stuff. Through your mind, you can create form, which is that idea that in the beginning was God, and the mind of God, and through the mind of God and the Word of God, the universe was created. If you begin to study this stuff, you find that there is this silver thread of truth that runs through these teachings. And it is said in the Hindu teachings that the achievement of this, that when each of these various disciplines has what I call daily disciplined spiritual practices. And those daily disciplined spiritual practices were used to take charge of one's consciousness. And it said that when one develops and disciplines their consciousness enough, one can use their mental inheritance to demonstrate this God-like ability. But there was only a select group who could study that. But can you imagine what it must have been like to meet with your peer groups in a sacred place where you explored your infinite power on this physical plane? Can you imagine what that might have been like? But even if you could study it, you could only use these spiritual principles on certain things. The next in the lineage, from my perception, is the Jewish faith. Started by Abraham, or Abram, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He grew up in a city where there were lots of gods. It was the, focal point of a lot of different trading routes. So there were lots of different religions. And one day he woke up and decided there isn't a lot of different gods. There's only one God. One God that is monotheistic. One God that does everything. And out of his realization moved into the Jewish faith. As with most traditions, when the Jewish faith was started, the first thing that came about were all the rules. I mean, if you read the Old Testament, the books of Moses, there's like 612 rules you have to follow. You have to do this, you have to do this. It's the same kind of game we play today. You got to hold your palms up so you can be receptive. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. Have your feet flat on the floor so the energy from Mother Earth can flow up through us. I mean, every day they write a new book of another rule, and we get confused by all the rules. Anyway, as the Jewish faith developed, up came the mystical side of Judaism. And as this was happening, there was a Hebrew scholar back in the 13th century who wrote a book called Moses Van Malman, who wrote a book called A Guide for the Perplexed. Sounds kind of like a book we could use today. Now, I know this is kind of dry, but it gets to a really good point. Moses Van Malman says in his book, A Guide for the Perplexed, he opens it up with the idea. Now remember, he's a Hebrew scholar, a scholar of the language. He's not a scholar of the dogma of Judaism. And he opens his book by saying this. He goes on to explain that the phrase, "let us make man in our image," signifies not a physical likeness, but an intellectual likeness. The similarities between the universe was created by creative mind, you have a portion of this creative mind. And then in the Hebrew teachings, it says that you're made in the image and likeness of God. What they're talking about is you have the same kind of intellectual capacity that God did. And as you begin then to move into the mystical side of Judaism, what you end up with is usually, it's embodied in the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is the mystical side of Judaism. And the purpose of the mystical side of Judaism was to heal the apparent separation when mankind moved from being one with God. We used to be one with God, then we moved into form, and therefore we separated our spirit from God. It's the old original sin thing that's in a whole bunch of different faiths. That once we fell from grace, that kind of thing. And so the whole idea in the Kabbalah is to teach a specific group of people how to use something they called Kovana, K-O-V-A-N-A-H, which means mystical intention in prayer. And the whole purpose of the Kabbalah was to teach people how to use their mystical intention in prayer to heal this spiritual separation. But you could only use it for this. Same thing in the Hindus. You could only use these tools for this. But then along comes a guy named Isaac Luria. And he's credited as being one of the 3 most influential teachers in the history of the Kabbalah. And he says this. This is what it says about him. But the doctrine of mystical intention and prayer for Luria went far beyond traditional mysticism. For Luria's doctrine of mystical intention and prayer stands directly on the borderline between traditional mysticism and magic. Now, when they use the word magic, they're not talking sleight of hand. Thousands of years ago, the word magic was used when you could use your intellectual ability, your consciousness to do something in form. Pick up your bed and walk was magic. Healing the sick was magic. Changing water to wine was called magic in the old days. And what Luria brought to the Kabbalah, the mystical teachings of Judaism, was you can use spiritual intention and prayer, not just on your spiritual needs. You can use them on your human needs. And when he brought that to the scholars, there was this big brouhaha. Oh, no, you can't. You can't use this stuff. It's the same game we play today. There's a power in the universe, but you can only use it for the highest and best good of everybody concerned. You can't use this power for your ego's gratification. You can't use this power to do this. You can't use this power to manipulate somebody. Jesus raised 3 people from the dead. He never asked any of them whether they wanted to come back. So you want to understand that as we study, there's all these rules about where you can and can't use it. And so there's this confusion. As the Kabbalah is being out there, about 3,500, 4,000 years ago, it was the birth of what is sometimes called the ancient mystery schools. The ancient mystery schools, the Essenes in the Middle East, the Druids in the United Kingdom, the School for Isis for women in Egypt, the Magi in Persia. And like today, these different mystery schools, just like we say in Unity, we acknowledge there are many paths to God. There are. The outcome is the same. The path to get there is different. And like we hold that today, it was the same for the ancient mystery schools. The ultimate path, the goal was the same, but the path was different. The Essenes taught a lot about meditation and repetition. And the Druids, for me, from my perspective, seem to take this energy that is life, this live or death thing, and bring it inside and you can step forth. I mean, I'd read it and I'd go, whoa, I'm not sure I want to do it that way. I'm not sure a lot about the school of Isis, but the school of the Magi in Persia, the reason they were called the Magi is they taught how to discipline your mind so that you could create form, magic. And the technique they used to do that was how to take charge of your imagination. Because if you take the word imagine and divide it up, it is spelled I am a genie. Now, I'm not saying that that's all the truth. I'm saying that if one explores all these ideas, there seems to be this silver thread of truth that runs through all of them. They may use different words. They may talk about different things. But if you step back, they're all talking about the power that we have within our own mind. Whether it's called creative mind, whether it's called creative consciousness, whether it's called belief. But there's this thread of truth about the power that we have. Then in the mystical writings about 3,000, 2,500 years ago, there is this idea, because all these great teachers were all, supposedly, they all knew each other. Maybe not on a physical level, but they knew each other on there was a silver thread of truth that ran from my head to your head, no matter what the discipline was. And they all knew they were teaching the same ultimate goal. And so about 2,500 years ago, in the various mystical writings, it was decided by not all of the masters, but the majority of them, that these secret teachings should be available to the whole world. Not just to men. Not just to people of a certain caste system. Not just to Jews who could prove Jewish lineage on both sides of their family for 5 generations. It was time to take these secret teachings to the world. And it is said that a call went out for an ascended master who was willing to come again to take these secret teachings and make them available for all of humanity. And it is said that 2,000 years ago, the ascended master who accepted this role was Jesus. I'm not saying that's exactly it. I'm not saying he wasn't the only begotten son of a virgin birth. I don't want to challenge any of that. What I'm talking about is if you begin to read these various things and step back and get a broad perspective, you begin to see that there is this thread of truth that runs through them that appears to culminate in the birth of Jesus. And in the original Greek of the New Testament, the guys that come to visit Jesus at his birth are not called the three wise men. In the original Greek, they're called the masters of magi. And the mystical significance of these masters of magi coming from three different places to be present at the birth of Jesus is mystical significance that this is the person to bring these teachings to the world. So that there is this mystical history of our teachings that sort of run through from 6,000 years ago in the Hindu teachings that move through into the birth of Jesus. And then if you move into Charles Fillmore's writings, and it was a couple, almost 2,000 years before people could really begin to understand what Jesus taught. I mean, 100 some years ago in the United States, we wouldn't let women vote or own property. In the United States, how could we allow women to stand up and be priests? It's only been recently we've stepped up to owning what Jesus brought to the party. Charles Fillmore talks about it this way. When he talks about we need to begin to accept the truth of who we are, know the truth and it shall set you free. And on page 71 of the Unity Treasure Chest, Charles Fillmore is talking about what is this truth we need to accept? Where do we start? Where do we begin? See, a lot of people will tell you you need to begin by forgiving enough. And as soon as you forgive enough, then you need to let go enough. And then as soon as you let go enough, you need to be willing enough. There's always this new book. But Jesus never said any of that. He never said you need to do something enough. He said you need to know something. Know something and it will set you free. And Charles on page 71 says, what is it we are supposed to know? And then he goes on and he says, the way to do this, the way to understand the truth of who you are is the way Jesus did it. This is a quote out of the Unity Treasure Chest. He acknowledged himself to be the Son of God. The way to do this is the way Jesus did it. He acknowledged himself to be the Son of God. The attainment of Christ consciousness calls for nothing less on our part than a definite recognition of ourselves as the sons and daughters of God, right here, right now, regardless of appearances to the contrary. That's where you and I are to start. To acknowledge ourselves as the living Christ. God expressing uniquely as woman. God expressing uniquely as man. That's the truth that sets you free. And what does it set you free from? The lie of human limitations. Jesus didn't say all things are possible if you believe. But you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. We put that on there. The teachers we grew up with that did that. But one of the problems is you and I come from an environment that does not own what Charles Fillmore says. We even bless the kids this morning. We bless you, we love you, and we behold the Christ within you. I was at a church last weekend, a Unity church, and when they did that same blessing, they said, and we behold the Christ you are. Not the Christ within. And I said, where did you get that? And they said, finally our YRUers came to us and said, we're tired of only being holy a part of us. We want to be holy, all of us. We want to step up to what Charles Fillmore says and own that we're the living Christ now. That's the truth that sets you free. There is this truth that runs through these great teachings. And the truth is that you're already holy. You're already a unique expression of this divine spirit we call God. And from that truth, you have the right and the authority to move into your personal life and use these principles we teach to create the life you want, to create the health you want, to create the relationships you want. Anything. Because what Charles again says, you can only know as much as you can demonstrate. Jesus said it, faith without works is dead. This philosophy is not just about sitting around Sunday morning and theorizing about it. It's about stepping out tomorrow, stepping out this afternoon, and using these principles to create something. And it doesn't have to be some huge thing. You get to start right where you are. I didn't start off using these principles to get well. I didn't think I could ever get well. They said the chances were 1,000,000 to 1. I would need a miracle. I started using these principles so I wouldn't cry myself to sleep. And what I found was what I did would make a difference. And then I thought, well, maybe if I get even better at using this stuff, what I do might be able to make a big difference. And I moved on. You start right where you are. Can you remember the first time you created a parking place? My bet is you didn't go to a class. You just had a friend who always had a parking place. And so you asked them one day, how do you do this? And they said, well, before I get there, I go do my stuff. If I'm at Unity, I call it affirmative prayer. If I'm at Science of Mind, I call it spiritual mind treatment. But if I'm just talking to my friends, I call it woo-woo. Before I get there, I go do my woo-woo. So there was a time. Your first time, you're on your way someplace and I need to get a parking place. I don't want to have to walk forever. And so you thought, why don't I try? And you tried it your way. Without any necessary book, the right words, you just tried it. And so you're sitting at the light and it's red and you want to park in the next block and everybody's looking for a parking place and part of your mind is going, and you're going, no, I'm going to hold this. I'm going to hold the truth. Light turns green, you start across the road and all of a sudden somebody comes running from the building and you stop and think, maybe. And so you just slow down. Sure enough, they get in their car and pull out. And part of you pulls into that parking place and the rest of you goes, ha ha ha! This stuff works! That's what just philosophy is about. That's why Jesus said faith without works is dead. It's through demonstrations that you begin to get a gut feel there. I know who I am. And then the next want comes up. Use the principles on that. Use these disciplines on that. And when that happens again, you get that experience. Wow, it worked again. And the next want comes up. This is what Jesus said when he said, pray unceasingly. I don't think it was one of these things on your knees with your hands folded and your head bowed. I'm talking about you declare the reality that you want no matter what's going on. And as you continue to do this after the third or fourth or fifth time in a row that works, there's a shift in your mind. And the shift is sort of like, I'm on a hot streak. Or all things are working together for good in my life. And I don't mean that as a statement when your life's going down the toilet. I mean you get an experience of it's all working. And when you make that shift, all kinds of peripheral stuff starts to happen that you're not really paying attention to. You know what I'm talking about. That's where most of us quit using the tools. What Richard encourages us to do every Sunday here is practice, practice, practice. Use these principles on a daily basis. And it doesn't work every time for me, but I don't get too upset with that because there were some times where Jesus couldn't heal. But you continue to use this stuff and you will move into the state of grace. The problem with the state of grace is that it's usually embodied with, well, you can't use it for this, you can't use it for this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Jesus never said that. You continue to use these principles even when you're in a state of grace, and there comes a time in your life when you have to stop and ask, who must I be for my life to be this magnificent? Who must I be to have a body that's this whole and this vital when I remember when it was so sick? Who must I be to be able to make my dreams come true? And the answer comes gently. My beloved daughter, in whom I'm well pleased. My beloved son. What Jesus brought to the human race is that you get to use these principles and you begin to experience your relationship with God through the quality of your human existence. Jesus didn't bring how to have an out-of-body experience of being one with God. Jesus brought the tools and principles to allow us to have an in-body experience being one with God. I know what it's like to be engulfed with disease. I know what it's like to be surrounded with loving, caring people who profess to know some great truth, and yet were encouraging me to let go of my priorities. You know, maybe God has a bigger plan for you than you just getting what you want. Maybe this is some karmic debt you're supposed to work off. And when I said, but I'm not going to, I'm going to be well, they said, that's your ego talking. I know what it's like to be engulfed with people who believe in disease. I also know what it's like to have friends and teachers like Richard and Maureen, who have the audacity, even though I didn't know them personally, but they have the audacity to sit and listen to my story. And when I was all done, look me right in the eye and say, you know you have power, don't you? It's an honor for me to stand in your presence. My hope and my prayer is that somehow what I've said this morning will inspire you and remind you that you're already holy and you have the right and the authority to make your dreams come true. God bless.